There was a time when Infiniti had the best looking car in the market, but these days they seem lost and inconsequential. So how did they get back to their former glory? In the 90s, Infiniti was building up its lineup with cars in direct competition to offerings from Lexus and Acura. They tried to be different with the J30, what some call an early version of our modern four-door coupe. They even got ahead of the competition with an early entry into the luxury SUV game with the beautiful QX4. But Infiniti was having trouble getting their footing. When the first generation Q45 failed, they sought to reinvent the model by making it a lot more like the competition. Sales were still not where they needed to be though. Nothing really seemed to work and it looked as though Infiniti was gonna be a failure. In one last ditch effort, Infiniti went for another full range overhaul, starting with the flagship Q45. It was a step in the right direction, but wasn't enough to save the company. So then they did something nobody was expecting. The G35 was unveiled in 2001, with production following a year later. The response was great. The leap from its predecessor was dramatic. Inside and out, it was clear that Infiniti started with a clean slate, and it was exactly what the company needed. The G20's 2.0 liter was replaced with the G35's 3.5 liter. Power jumped up more than 100 horsepower. And to push them closer to German rivals, a coupe was also released. I appreciate that the coupe wasn't just a shrunken G35 sedan with less doors. Both the front and back were restyled to have a sportier look. They even spelled out Infiniti across the back, a trend that seems to be growing popular today, 20 years later. This was a stellar car, one I found truly beautiful. It was well positioned into the future of automotive design, but it wasn't crazy, quirky, or weird. At the same time, it was far from their past. Just imagine that there was a time when a dealer had both of these cars on the lot. This car won over the world and landed the G35 on a number of Car of the Year lists. Knowing they had a design language that could sell, Infiniti didn't just stop there. They released a successor to the QX4 with the FX. They threw away the boxy, rugged style for a curvy, svelte design. Front and rear lights were thin by 2002 standards, and the interior was unlike anything on offer at that time. Even the M45 was a huge departure. It was dubbed as Infiniti's muscle car. It had the shape and lines of something more menacing than we were used to from the brand, but it didn't really fit in with the rest of the brand. It was a brute monster. As indicated by the 45, it was a 4.5 liter V8 pumping out 340 horsepower. It was able to sprint to 60 in under 6 seconds. Now, while I've always liked the weird and menacing M45, the public didn't know what it was or what to make of it. Sales were abysmal and it only lasted a couple of model years before a full redesign. Despite that, Infiniti was clearly invigorated. It had arguably the best looking car in the market, a revamped lineup with tech ahead of its time, and most importantly, it was now nicely aligned with the Germans, and for once the public could actually see their game plan. Infiniti was poised to take the industry by storm. To me, there are few things sadder than the follow-up to a successful design. It's always watered down, compromised. Designers seem worried about shaking up a good thing. So the car ends up being a generic version of a good design. With their feet against the fire, the original G35 was a Hail Mary pass to save a company. Now they made a conservative forward step to simply reshape their 2002 design for 2007. In 2002, the C-Class looked like this, the IS like this, and the Acura TL like this. But just 2 years later, Acura released one of their best designs to date with the 2004 TL. And by the time the 2007 G35 came out, Mercedes and Lexus had caught up. A similar watering down happened to the rest of the lineup, with the muscular M45 becoming a very handsome but ultimately forgettable people mover. Also, the axing of the Q45 meant the M45 took its spot, again leaving buyers confused how to cross-shop against rivals. While the original FX was an interesting new and sleek design, the successor was weird, with out-of-place vents and unappealing light designs. In one generational change, the foundation that Infiniti had built up was already crumbling. They also released the EX crossover that was well appointed but unfortunately proportioned. It was an industry first for around view cameras, and there was huge buzz around its self-healing paint. It even had lane departure warning, a feature that is only now becoming mainstream. It's unfortunate because Infiniti had the forethought to know that technology would play a big role in selling cars. I remember sitting in a 2002 Q45 at the dealer, being blown away by voice commands. Again, a feature that's only been mainstream for a few years. But this generational design blunder seemed unrecoverable. All that being said, the new G35 and G37 Coupe were well received and still sold well, but the rest of the lineup suffered at the hands of more compelling rivals. Today, Infiniti seems lost. Where at one point it was posed to be the next Lexus and give the Germans a run for their money, now their lineup is kinda sad. The G35 and 7 are now the aging Q50 and Q60. The Q50 without a significant change since production started in 2013. The rest of the range is comprised of only SUVs, QX50, 60, and 80, covering the compact, midsize, and full-size segments. Infiniti's current design language doesn't inspire hope. It's nothing we haven't seen from Mazda or Lexus, but in a much more boring execution. When you think of how Infiniti changed the game with the likes of the original G35 and the FX, it's hard to see the appeal of the latest designs. It seems in finding their corporate face, they lost their footing. The latest QX60 also suffers from unfortunate styling cues like the weird non-exhaust elements and a very real resemblance to the Pathfinder it's based on. Thankfully, another major issue Infiniti suffers from has been addressed with the QX60, a redesigned interior. While it's not breaking any new ground, it's certainly fitting in 2022. Personally, I think it's great, their best interior in years. Sadly, the Q50 and QX50 are still fitted with a 10-year-old design. It's a hard sell, to say the least. So where does Infiniti go from here? It's hard to say. I'm hoping that the aging Q50 is proof that something special is coming for the new model. Again, I feel like this will be their Hail Mary pass. If they simply iterate on the current model, it may be the end for Infiniti cars. And without some big interior refreshing, the same may be true for the SUVs. Truthfully, I'm sad to see a company I had so much hope for end up in its current predicament. But they're in an unusually useful place. Again, they have nothing to lose. It's time for the Hail Mary pass. Let's just hope they remember that the possibilities are infinite.